Hello. This week is a bit different. It's someone else doing the talking for a change. Bryony Dixon is the curator of silent film at the British Film Institute. And her interest is much broader than that, but especially in early film and early filmmaking. And she is talking about The Spy in Black, which was the first collaboration between Powell and Pressburger, who then went on to make many more films. It was written by Clouston from Orkney, and rather than go on and talk more about it, I'll let Bryony tell you more about it. Here she is.
Hello, Bryony Dixon here from the BFI National Archive. I'm one of a team of curators who looks after the film collection for the nation. And I'm here to talk about the classic Powell and Pressburger film, The Spy in Black, released in 1939, and parts of which were filmed in Orkney. The Spy in Black was released in 1939 on the eve of the outbreak of the Second World War, but of course it was set in the previous war. It's an ingenious spy thriller with a German U-boat command attempting to disable British ships off Orkney, aided by German spies living undercover in Orkney, not all of whom are what they seem. I'll talk a little bit about how it connects to Orkney, the source novel, and its writer, Orcadian Joseph Storer Clouston. The Spy in Black is famous in film history for being the first collaboration by these two gentlemen. Emmerich Pressburger, a Hungarian writer of talent, he's the one on the left, who spent years working for the best film company in Europe, UFA, in Berlin. He's of Jewish descent, so he has to flee after 1933 when the Nazis come in. And as he does so, he leaves the door of his Berlin apartment open to save the stormtroopers the bother of breaking it down. And that's the kind of guy he is. On the right is Michael Powell. He is an Englishman from Kent. All he's ever wanted to do in his life is to be a film director. He's made nearly 30 films by the time these two guys meet, showing considerable talent. He's worked with Hollywood directors Rex Ingram and Harry Lackman. He's worked with Hitchcock and doing quota quickies for Alexander Korda. This is his first big picture. And this pair will become the famous Powell and Pressburger. Outside of Hitchcock, the most celebrated British filmmakers of all time. They go on to make very famous films such as The Red Shoes, Matter of Life and Death, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and so on. So Powell and Pressburger meet here at the London Film Studios in Denham, just outside London, where the studio boss, Hungarian Alexander Korda, has a problem. His producer has commissioned a script for a film based on the popular novel The Spy in Black, but the script is rubbish. Powell says it's over-literal, dialogue-bound, and offered no interesting star roles. It was adapted by a writer called Roland Pertwee, who was indeed the dad of Doctor Who, the more famous Pertwee, but it needs a serious rewrite. Korda brings in Powell and Pressburger, who meet for the first time in a room with this outraged scriptwriter and a very irritated producer who've been working on it already. Pressburger makes a few notes on the back of an envelope and completely reorganizes the plot and the characters. He even changes the gender of one of the main protagonists. And it's a feat which really impresses Michael Powell. And if they ever make a Powell and Pressburger movie, this is the key scene where these two people meet and sort of understand how each other work really well. So these are the two stars that Pressburger, as the screenwriter, has to accommodate in the script. These are Alexander Korda's very expensive stars, the great German actor Conrad Veidt and the wonderful Valerie Hobson. Pressburger notes that it was the worst day's work Dr. Goebbels ever did when he let Veidt leave the German film industry. He would go on to be our best propaganda tool. Valerie Hobson is kind of English Rose, an actress, though, with enough intelligence and class and sort of chutzpah to be a foil for Conrad Veidt, who would otherwise, I think, over-dominate. So Pressburger and Powell agree that when adapting a novel, you have to read the book, get its essential ideas, its mood, and then throw it away and rewrite the whole story for film. And this is no disrespect to the original novel at all. They wouldn't have bought it if it was no good. But books and films work in very different ways, and you have to rewrite accordingly. So what the film version does cleverly is to change the setting. So they don't try to update it and set it in the 1930s. They leave it in the First World War. Quite surprisingly, the hero is the enemy. He's German. Powell and Pressburger set out to impress Alexander Korda with the opening of the film. And the first 4 minutes of this film was so impressive that film history professor Charles Barr wrote an entire article about it called The First 4 Minutes. And it establishes everything we need to know about our hero, Captain Hart, the U-boat commander. He's a war hero. He has little time for officialdom and propaganda. And it sets up a lot of motifs, such as the privations of war, so the lack of food and cigarettes, which sort of keeps everybody on edge. And it also emphasizes the capacity of the Commander Hart to inspire friendship and loyalty and his essential honorableness. So it's a clever piece of writing. There is no clumsy exposition. The details are really worth paying attention to. For example, the hotel receptionist in this early scene shields Hart, the commander, from this sailor you see in the middle of this image, who's been sent to fetch him back to duty after he's just come back from 16 days in a cramped submarine. The hotel receptionist is played by Bernard Miles, one of several small but perfectly rounded character roles scattered throughout the film. And the sailor here, who's very memorable, is the uncredited Skelton Nags. What a fantastic name. Marius Goring on the right is Hart's right-hand man and friend. He's a great character we come to care quite a lot about. And of course, Marius Goring goes on to be a regular in Powell and Pressburger's greatest film. You may remember him as conductor number 71 in A Matter of Life and Death and in The Red Shoes. So when he's given the job of director, Michael Powell insists on visiting Orkney, visiting the location in which the film is set and which some of the filming will take place. His producer asks him, why do you actually need to go there? Because, we're going to send the second unit to do all these sort of few location shots. But he replies, as he says in his memoirs, because Scapa flows in the Orkneys, I've never been to the Orkneys and I'm going to make a film about the Orkneys. So he's saying really to the producer that it's really essential that he gets a feel for the location and how he's going to portray it and a feel for how the land lies, which is actually quite crucial in the original story and in the film. So his second unit cameraman will film several scenes in Orkney. There are some process shots that have been added to it, of course. The fleet in Scapa Flow, these are sort of library shots. And the fleet being in Scapa Flow is what the whole story is about, of course, the worst kept secret in the history of warfare. And Commander Hart and his colleagues have a very detailed naval chart, which you see in this image, which they use to get past the British defences. So they sort of go in the submarine sort of underneath all the defences and they wash up on Hoy. Here we have Conrad Veidt arriving on motorcycle. This is an important plot detail because no one will suspect somebody. How would anybody arrive with a motorcycle off a boat? So very clever piece of plotting by Stora Clouston. Now, Powell, when he makes his lightning visits to Orkney, is already sort of known in the area as the guy who directed the famous film The Edge of the World, which was set up about St Kilda, but filmed on Fula. His cameramen will shoot various scenes around Orkney, although a lot of it is shot in the studio. But Powell insists on really examining the territory and the buildings, getting the correct scale for Orkney. Residents will recognise some of the locations. They might be a bit baffled by how Hart gets that motorbike off the beach. But despite this, I think they make some efforts to portray Orkney in a kind of realistic way. Powell tells quite a good story, in fact, about his time in Orkney and about meeting Stora Clouston himself. So he says in his memoirs, on our arrival at Kirkwall, my first act was to go to the local hotel and find out where Stora Clouston was, where the author of the story lived. He had a house on the shores of Scapa Flow looking southward, and he was at home. I hired a car, and in 20 minutes we were marching up to his front door, demanding a cup of tea, a technique I had learned from John Seaborn. It has two advantages. It puts your host under an obligation to you for assuming his hospitality, and you get a cup of tea. So, having established his location and made his instructions for the location shooting, they are away. And in this image here, we see the complex plot, which is established in The Spy in Black, which involves some treacherous characters here. J. Stora Clouston's novel was often linked with this kind of paranoid invasion literature, which peopled the countryside with German agents. This is entirely untrue, but people thought that they were everywhere, and there was a sort of, but it probably wasn't a bad idea that people were a bit suspicious and cautious about people and double agents around the countryside. So here, the plot thickens as we see with this rather elegant elderly lady who's actually a German agent and is up to no good, replacing the school teacher in the story, who is sort of kidnapped. See from this scene, the German spy lady is going to actually drop the schoolmistress who they've kidnapped over a cliff. This is very nasty, quite a shock. So these are the kind of people we're dealing with. Now here we see Captain Hart, who has arrived at the schoolhouse, made contact with the German spy. She is called Fraulein Thiel, and she is the substitute for the kidnapped school teacher. And she is his contact on Orkney, and they are going to shack up in the schoolhouse. So she occasionally is in trouble from the local minister, who is not very happy about her staying here in the schoolhouse on her own, which seems very difficult for him. But she says that she's absolutely fine, and she is quite a feisty character. She is certainly capable of acting as a foil to Conrad Veidt, who I think would otherwise overwhelm any other female star of the time. What's lovely about this film, this particular image, is he finally gets to eat something after having failed to get anything to eat over in Germany, where they are pretty much cut off from all food supply. by the British, he finally gets to eat a great wad of fresh butter. So quite a happy moment. So Conrad Veidt plays, as I say, a good German. This is a recurring character in Powell and Pressburger films. And it's quite important, this idea of the good German. The English, many English people adopted this rather more sort of subtle propaganda method against the Germans, by which they were saying, we don't hate Germans, we hate Nazis. And there's this a subtle difference. So instead of it just being this very black and white kind of opposition that the Nazis have adopted, you're good or you're bad, you're a friend or you're an enemy, here it's a little more subtle and sophisticated. So as the two main characters are isolated in the schoolhouse, there's a certain amount of chemistry that develops. So again, this is what we love about Powell and Pressburger. They always weave in these sort of extra layers. So here we're thinking, maybe there will be a sort of some kind of romantic narrative developing here. This is one of my favourite shots in the film. Here is Conrad Veidt using the motorbike side mirror to shave and dress, while he's also keeping an eye on the fleet out in Scapa Flow. The schoolhouse has the perfect view of overlooking the bay. And here are the two main characters again observing the fleet. So they're seeing what's going on with the British fleet, making their plans to call in the submarine corps to take it out. So there are several more complicated plot twists. We have the arrival of the real school teacher's fiance with this present of a gramophone, which is sort of semi-comic device here. And we also have the meddling minister who is forever sort of concerned for the moral behaviour of the school teacher. So she's always sort of juggling these two things with being rediscovered or discovered, uncovered, and the meddling locals. So in this slide we can see her relationship with the traitor Ashington. Now, he is a British officer who's gone bad. So he's been demoted by the British Navy and he's a bit of a drunk, and in revenge he's going to divulge secrets to the German U-boat commander. Now, what this also does is to very cleverly reveal that, in fact, the school teacher is not, in fact, a British agent, not, in fact, a German agent. She's, in fact, a British agent pretending to be a German agent, and that Ashington is no traitor. He's actually her husband. And here you see the moment where Conrad discovers this. So it's all getting very layered, very complicated, and it's a terrific plot. And here we have its author, clever author called Joseph Storer Clouston. You're probably familiar with him if you're from Orkney. You'll know all about him. But here he is with his family. And in case you don't know, he was born in 1870 in Upperby near Carlisle to an Orcadian father who was a psychiatrist of great note, Sir Thomas Stewart Clouston, who lives mainly in Edinburgh and practices there. So his son Joseph goes to Magdalen College in Oxford and is called to the bar, but he never practices law. He prefers to make his career as a writer and a historian. He has early success with his first novel, written in 1899, a farcical comedy kind of in the P.G. Wodehouse mode called The Lunatic at Large. Now, surely it can't be a coincidence that Daddy's a psychiatrist, and I think Storer Clouston is making fun a bit of that profession. It's very funny, and it's written with a light-heartedness, which is reminiscent of, I say, P.G. Wodehouse or Jerome K. Jerome, those great humorists of the late 19th century. Woodhouse was, in fact, a fan and wrote him a lovely letter. And a young Michael Powell had also read this, courtesy of his Auntie Ethel, who sent it to him as a young man. And there are several sequels, as you see from these lovely original covers. And here are a shelf load of The Lunatic at Large and sequels from the Orkney archive, where they're preserved. The later ones were actually written after The Spy in Black, which was written later, but so popular was the first one that actually he kept on going back to it. And these were, of course, eventually adapted, as many popular novels were, for film. And this is a reference, if you can see in the middle there, it's a review of a film by the Vitagraph Company in 1910, so very early days of film. And you can just see The Lunatic at Large. It doesn't seem to attempt to adapt a long novel. It couldn't do as a very short film. It's about a nutty botanist who's mistaken for an escaped lunatic. So the second book is the film of the book is a faithful adaptation. It's called the same, The Lunatic at Large, in 1921. Made in the south of Britain at the Hepworth Studios just outside London. It's directed by Henry Edwards, who you can see on the right, and he stars in it with his wife, Chrissy White, who's on the left. It is a lost film, unfortunately, so we'll never know what it was like, but apparently it was very sprightly and went down terribly well. Looks good from the pictures anyway. And this is another scene from that picture. This is the outside the asylum. The film, in fact, was good enough to get international distribution. So you can see this in a poster from Denmark, which is appropriately Nordic. The next adaptation of Stora Clouston is an American film. So this was released in 1927, directed by famous director Fred Neumeier, who did lots of Harold Lloyd films in Hollywood. And here's a lovely contemporary poster, and you can see it's quite an energetic comedy. The reviews for this film were mixed, but most of the reviewers appreciated the original source and said that it had a very clever plot, much opportunity for farce and slapstick comedy. And here you can see the main actor. You can see this is a very American style physical performance. And there's another poster here where you can see how the treatment of this sort of story, American style. So this is another adaptation of Stora Clouston's novels. This is Drôle de Drame, sort of translates as a funny story, released in 1937. So same story again. It's the only film adaptation, apart from The Spy in Black, to survive, and it's still a popular classic to this day. This turns up frequently. So this is the original novel that it was adapted from, The Mystery of Number 47, written in 1917. So back to The Spy in Black. The Spy in Black, of course, was written the same year as The Mystery of Number 17. It was written in 1917, so right in the midst of the First World War, in a much more serious vein. So, knowing Orkney as he did and its vulnerability as a naval base, Stora Clouston knew how seriously this could affect the outcome of the war. So when Captain Hart crosses over the mainland and he sees Scapa Flow for the first time, he says, "Those distant patches of grey, those were the cause of all my country's troubles." So he's talking about Germany. "But for them, Peace would long since have dictated, and a mighty German empire would be towering above all other states in the world. How I hated, and yet being a sailor, how I respected them. So he's talking about the British battleships that you can see here in the distance, and that he's been observing from the schoolhouse during this time. So Stora Clouston was right. In 1918, right at the end of the First World War, as you know, a German submarine, the UB-116, attempted to enter Scapa Flow, but was detected by a new piece of technology, the hydrophone, and it was sunk. But by the start of World War II, the warnings implicit in The Spy in Black became horribly real again. Only 11 days after the film was premiered in London, and a month after war was declared, UB-47, commanded by Gunther Prien, managed to enter Scapa Flow and sink the British ship HMS Royal Oak with a loss of 835 souls. Of course, Powell and Pressburger could have known nothing of these events, this momentous meeting when they first met in Corder's office to plan the making of the film. But the bond between the two men was instant, with unspoken understanding. They were both very cultured internationalists. They had a profound confidence and almost mathematical understanding of filmmaking that would leave them free to add those extra layers that we so appreciate in their films, and leaving them free to fight the war in their own way by this interesting and sophisticated use of propaganda. So I hope that gives you some of the background to this fascinating film, The Spy in Black, and the amazing story by J. Stora Clouston, and the great acting of Conrad Veidt, and the first ever Powell and Pressburger film. Thanks for listening.
Well, my thanks to Bryony for that very interesting talk about the film. If you enjoyed that, a like, a comment, and or a subscribe would be awfully nice. I shall be back next week with something more. And in the meantime, have fun till then.